Good afternoon and welcome. I am Pastor John, your professor for today. Not really, but we'll go with it. And welcome to Christianity 101. So over the next few weeks, what I kind of want to do with all of you out there is to just kind of go back to the basics of Christianity, of being a Christian, specifically. So we're going to be going over a lot of different topics, things like praying, finding churches, what you should be looking for and that type of stuff, how to read your Bible, and all those kind of basic things that sometimes we need a little bit of a refresher on, and other times we might not know necessarily how to approach. So that is the goal for this entire course today. But I figure that we need to start with a introductory sort of topic, and that is, what is a Christian? That is kind of the foundation and basis for all of this, really. Understanding what that really is. And on the surface, it seems like a very simple question. But the reality, when you really dig deep into it, is there's been a lot of debate about what a Christian truly is over the years. In fact, part of the reason why we have so many different denominations is because people don't necessarily agree exactly on what a Christian is. Now, that might surprise some of you out there. So let me give you a few examples of different definitions and some of the sort of issues with them. So for instance, I'm sure if I said to many of you that the definition of what a Christian is just simply a Christ follower, you'd agree with me. That is very, very, very true. It is someone who follows the teachings of Christ, who exemplifies all that type of stuff. But we start running into some issues with that because, okay, well, you can, by that definition, technically believe in a completely separate religion, be it like an aspiring, we'll use Buddhist as an example. You can be literally a Buddhist and claim to be a Buddhist, but because you're following the teachings of Christ, then does that also make you a Christian? And you kind of run into some issues there. In fact, the example I typically like to use for this is one of my favorite biblical scholars of all time, Albert Schweitzer. He wrote a book called The Quest for the Historical Jesus. I might have that wrong, but you can look it up. But very famous biblical scholar, and during his life, he had a very comfortable teaching position in Germany. He's German. And he decided one day to give that up and go and be a medical missionary in Africa. And he did that for the rest of his life. Now, the issue that we kind of run into with Albert Schweitzer is that he didn't really believe a lot of the things that you would typically think a Christian would believe. For instance, he didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. He just believed he was, in his own words, a failed apocalyptic prophet. So for many people, that would be an issue, but Albert Schweitzer, I think, using this definition would argue, well, hold on a second, I am more closely following the example Christ gave us by going out and helping the poor, by going out and being in that community. And honestly, if you believe that Jesus came from heaven to earth, I'm also following that example better by going from a much more privileged sort of state, which was Europe, and going to an underprivileged state, which is Africa, and helping out there and ministering there. I'm, going and being with those people instead of sitting in my ivory tower, watching as all this stuff is going on and commentating on it. So that is kind of the issue with that. Well, what if we go kind of the opposite direction and say that a Christian is anyone who has been saved by grace? Now, to be clear, the first definition is not a bad definition, and this one isn't either. I think these are very fair definitions. The idea here being that we take the whole, working sort of aspect out of this and make it all entirely something that God did. And this is a good definition. But there's also been a lot of criticisms of this definition, and rightfully so. I mean, what do we say about somebody who went through their entire life doing horrible, horrible, horrible things, and then on their deathbed says that they are suddenly saved by God? And this is something that people have wrestled with. And honestly, in that case, we don't necessarily know exactly what God is doing in that situation, but you still have to kind of wonder if there isn't a little bit more that's needed there than just somebody being able to say at the last minute, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God and I give my life to him. That, there needs to be maybe a little bit more to that sort of aspect, because otherwise what does anything we really do on this planet matter? So what I would consider to be the definition of a Christian would be anyone who has been radically transformed by God through the work done on the cross and exhibits the behaviors that go with that. So what do I mean? Well, we call today the anatomy of a Christian, and the Bible verse that we went over is a famous one involving the fruits of the Spirit. So you have things like kindness, faithfulness, self-control, goodness, joy, gentleness, forbearance, peace, love. These are all things that a Christian should exhibit. The most important of these, I would say, is being love. If you find an individual who loves God and is very open about that, well, not even necessarily open about that, but you can see that they love God and that they're loving their neighbors and they're loving themselves, then you're probably dealing with a Christian there. And that, to me, is kind of the really important thing. There needs to be a uniting between the faith aspect, the fact that we can't do anything to get closer to God, but also the idea that in being redeemed in that way, there is something that happens and changes within us that leads to a visible transformation. And that is kind of the important part. So now, with all this being said, I'm going to let you all go forth, and I hope that you exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. I will see you all next week. Have a good one.